Welcome to the module, Culturally Responsive Teaching Practices. We value your time and appreciate your active participation during this session. Here are a few suggested learning norms to make the most of your time. If possible, work in an environment with as few distractions as possible so you can engage and reflect. Take notes and jot down ideas and questions as needed. Lastly, use this time wisely to ensure your professional learning with university instructors is productive. The agenda for this module is learning objectives, what is culturally responsive teaching, the 4 R's of culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive classrooms versus traditional classrooms, 4 culturally responsive teaching practices, and summary of learning. Here are the learning objectives for this module. By the end of this session, participants will be able to define culturally responsive teaching, explain the 4 R's of culturally responsive teaching, explain the difference between culturally responsive classrooms versus traditional classrooms, explore key culturally responsive practices. Before we can begin with professional practice, we must first understand what is meant by the term culturally responsive. So what is culturally responsive teaching? It's an instructional approach that intentionally leverages students' cultural backgrounds, lived experiences, and languages as assets to enhance the relevance, engagement, and effectiveness of learning. It centers on reflection, strong relationships, and empowering practices to create a safe and inclusive learning environment where all students feel valued and affirmed. It is grounded in the belief that every student can learn and succeed when instruction honors their identities and experiences. By incorporating a wide range of curricular content, educators ensure learning is relevant, engaging, and accessible for different learners. This inclusive approach to teaching brings many benefits to the classroom and to student learning. But before we go much further, we need to pause and consider some of the challenges it also presents. Before we continue, it's important to pause and discuss some considerations you have to make as public education instructors when implementing these practices. Over the years, the term culturally responsive teaching, or CRT, has incurred negative connotations because it can lead to controversial discussion topics. As a result, many districts and schools have established policies around culturally responsive teaching practices, and it is your professional responsibility to ask about acceptable language, materials, and conversations regarding CRT in your classroom setting. Speak with your school point of contact and/or a member of the administration before any implementation. A good rule of thumb is, do not engage in any political discussions with students or faculty. You can talk honestly about the world, but with reserve, based on facts and as aligned to standards. Do not share your personal opinions about anything controversial in nature. If you question whether you should say or discuss something, err on the side of caution and avoid the topic. Now, with that understanding, we will unpack the key components of culturally responsive pedagogy. Affirmation, validation, cognition, and information processing, all of which are intended to bridge home and the classroom, centering on student voices and creating a safe space for learning. Let's look at each of these more closely. The first component of culturally responsive practice centers on affirming the student. This aspect is sometimes misunderstood as simply making students feel good about themselves. However, affirmation goes beyond boosting self-esteem. Affirming a student means communicating, "I see you," by recognizing, accepting, and valuing students for who they are. It involves understanding and honoring students' multiple identities as learners, as individuals, and as members of cultural and social groups, without viewing any aspect of their identity as conflicting with academic success. Validation means helping students feel seen, heard, and understood in the classroom. It happens when students see themselves and their stories in what they learn and when instructors listen to their experiences and ideas. Validation also means talking honestly about the world in ways students can understand and is appropriate. When instructors recognize that life is not the same for everyone and that some people face challenges, others may not, students feel respected and valued. Giving students a voice, asking about their experiences, and allowing different viewpoints helps create a classroom where everyone feels heard and learning feels meaningful. Cognition means helping students learn new ideas by connecting them to what they already know from their lives and cultures. Our brains understand new learning best when it is linked to familiar experiences. Everyone has a knowledge tree made up of their experiences, and culture helps shape how that knowledge is organized. When instructors use examples from students' everyday lives, communities, and experiences, learning makes more sense and feels easier to understand. Instead of just using culture to get students excited at the start of a lesson, instructors can use it to help explain ideas in a deeper way. For example, using something familiar, like games or routines students know, can help them understand harder concepts. This helps students learn better, remember more, and feel more confident in their learning. Processing information means helping students remember what they learn and hold on to it, not just understand it in the moment. While understanding helps a student get it, processing helps the learning stick so they can remember and use it later. Our brains remember best when learning is active and fun, such as through call and response, music, movement, storytelling, and talking with others, all of which provide opportunities to embed students' cultures and experiences. People learn and remember in different ways. Some students learn best by reading and writing quietly, while others remember better when they can move, sing, talk, or work with friends. Using games, songs, actions, and stories helps build strong brain connections and makes learning easier to remember. When instructors connect new learning to what students already know and let them do something with the information, all students benefit and feel more confident in their learning. Let's pause to reflect and discuss before moving on. How does implementing components of culturally responsive teaching support student learning? Pause the video at this time to jot down your responses. Here are some possible responses. Implementing components of culturally responsive teaching helps support student learning because it makes the content meaningful, affirming, and connected to who they are. When students see their cultures, identities, and experiences respected and reflected in the classroom, they feel valued and safe, which increases motivation and engagement. It also builds strong relationships and gives students a voice in their learning, helping them feel a sense of belonging and ownership. By connecting instruction to real life, experiences, and holding high expectations for all students. This approach fosters curiosity, confidence, and a genuine desire to learn. The components we just learned align with the 4 R's of culturally responsive teaching: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility, which provide a framework for creating learning environments where all students feel valued, engaged, and supported. In this section, we will discuss all 4, including application to classroom scenarios. The 4 R's: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility are core principles commonly associated with culturally responsive and culturally sustaining teaching. Together, they guide educators in creating equitable, inclusive, and meaningful learning environments. These principles emphasize the importance of honoring students' identities, connecting learning to their lives, building meaningful relationships, and fostering shared accountability within the classroom community. Together, the 4 R's guide educators in designing instruction that is inclusive, equitable, and responsive to the diverse cultural experiences students bring to their learning. Let's begin with the first R, respect. Respect in culturally responsive teaching is reflected in the intentional valuing and honoring of students' cultural identities, lived experiences, languages, and varied perspectives. It requires educators to recognize culture as an asset and to integrate students' backgrounds into teaching and learning in meaningful ways. Respect is demonstrated through consistently high academic expectations for all students, inclusive and equitable instructional practices, and a genuine commitment to building trusting relationships. By affirming students as capable learners and whole individuals, educators create learning environments where students feel valued, supported, and empowered to succeed. The second R is relevance, which is essential to culturally responsive teaching because it acknowledges the significance of knowledge and culture in shaping understanding in today's world. Knowledge is grounded in centuries of lived experience and is deeply connected to the communities in which it develops. When instruction emphasizes relevance, learners are better able to connect new learning to their own lives, gaining a deeper understanding of their place within local and global contexts. When teaching, recognizing both past and present day relationships between people fosters meaningful learning and promotes a sense of responsibility, stewardship, and engagement with the world around them. Let's apply the first 2 R's to a real-world classroom scenario. An elementary instructor tutors a small group of primarily English language learners during ELA. Students learned about folk tales in their whole group setting and are now tasked with identifying characteristics of folk tales in their assigned reading. The instructor shares the folk tale, The Tortoise and the Hare, with her small group as an example. But when she asks for them to write down characteristics, talking animals, morals, or universal themes, simple plots, she is met with blank stares and silence from her students. How could the instructor have made this lesson more respectful and relevant to the students? Stop the video to write down your answers. Here are some possible answers you may have also written down. The instructor could have selected a folk tale from the student's home country or one representing their culture. For example, if the students were primarily Spanish-speaking, she could have chosen the folk tale The Coyote and the Rabbit, which is popular in Latin American countries. She could have asked the students to share a common folk tale from their family or culture. Once she and the students identify the lesson or moral of the coyote and the rabbit, the instructor could ask how that applies to their lives in school. Reciprocity is the third R and is a vital component of effective teaching because it emphasizes relationships grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and shared benefit. In an educational context, reciprocity recognizes that teaching and learning are collaborative processes in which both educators and students contribute knowledge, perspectives, and experiences. By valuing the exchange of ideas and honoring the role of culture and knowledge in shaping our collective future, educators foster more meaningful and equitable learning environments. Practicing reciprocity strengthens relationships among individuals and communities, promoting mutual growth and shared responsibility through the respectful exchange of knowledge. The last R of culturally responsive teaching practices is responsibility, which means helping students understand that everyone has a role in making the world fair, kind, and caring. It includes learning about the past, understanding how people have been treated, and thinking about how we can make better choices today. Responsibility also means using what we learn to help our communities and take care of the people around us. When we act with respect, gratitude, and accountability, we learn how to make positive changes and build a better future together. Here's another scenario to consider. In an 11th grade U.S. history class, students are discussing primary sources related to the civil rights movement. Malik, I notice you've been listening closely. I'm curious, what stands out to you in this source? It talks about protests, but it feels kind of distant. Where I live, people organize online more than in the streets. That's an important perspective. You're right. Organizing looks different now. Can you tell me more about how people use social media to push for change? People post videos or call things out. That's how stuff spreads fast. Mr. Alvarez nods and then addresses the class. Malik just made a great connection. He pointed out that activism today often happens online, not just through marches. Let's think about how that compares to what we're seeing in these historical sources. Malik, would you be willing to help us create a comparison chart, past and present forms of activism, using examples you've seen? Later in the lesson, because of what Malik shared, tomorrow we're going to analyze a modern social media campaign alongside a historical protest, comparing and contrasting socially responsible methods and community impact. How is this scenario an example of reciprocity and responsibility? Stop the video to write down your answers. Here are some possible answers. The instructor, Mr. Alvarez, learns from the student Malik's lived experience. Malik's cultural knowledge is treated as academic knowledge. Mr. Alvarez adapts instruction based on Malik's input. Authority and expertise are shared, not held solely by the instructor. Students analyze social responsibility and protest as well as impact on community. Is there a difference in culturally responsive classrooms versus traditional classrooms? Yes. In a culturally responsive classroom, instructors use students' backgrounds, languages, and life experiences to help make learning interesting and meaningful. Students feel included, valued, and connected to what they are learning. In a classroom that is not culturally responsive, lessons are taught the same way to everyone, which can ignore students' differences and make learning feel less exciting or harder to understand. When students' lives are not connected to school, some students may feel left out. Culturally responsive classrooms see students as strengths and help everyone feel like they belong and can succeed. Next, We will look at a few examples of how a culturally responsive classroom differs from a traditional classroom. Each example begins with two pictures. Jot down some of the differences you see between them. Affirming cultural connections in a culturally responsive classroom means recognizing, valuing, and honor students' cultures, languages, identities, and lived experiences as strengths in learning. What differences do you see in the pictures shown? Stop the video if you need more time to observe the images. Affirming cultural connections by integrating students' home cultures into learning makes students feel validated. In a culturally responsive classroom, instructors intentionally validate and include students' home cultures, languages, and lived experiences in learning. Lessons, materials, and discussions reflect students' backgrounds, and students are encouraged to share their stories and ways of knowing. Home languages and cultural practices are respected and used as strengths, helping students feel valued, confident, and connected to their learning. In contrast, a traditional classroom often teaches all students the same way, with little attention to cultural differences. Students are expected to adapt to the school culture, which can lead to disengagement and a weaker connection between home and school. Contextualized learning in a culturally responsive classroom means making lessons meaningful by bridging a student's culture and community to instruction in the classroom. What differences do you see in the pictures shown? Stop the video if you need more time to observe the images. Contextualized learning makes lessons relevant. In a culturally responsive classroom, lessons are intentionally connected to students' real-world experiences, cultures, and communities, making learning meaningful and relevant. Instructors use examples, stories, real-life events, and invite students to share personal connections to the content, helping them see the purpose of what they are learning. In contrast, a traditional classroom often relies heavily on textbooks and generalized examples, with limited attention to students' backgrounds. As a result, learning may feel disconnected from students' lives and less engaging. Let's look at one more. An inviting environment in a culturally responsive classroom means creating a space where students feel safe and valued both emotionally and physically. What differences do you see in the picture shown? Stop the video if you need more time to observe the images. Inviting environments are important. In a culturally responsive classroom, instructors create a warm and welcoming environment by building positive relationships and intentionally designing spaces that reflect students' cultures, languages, and communities. Students are greeted with care, see themselves represented in the classroom, and feel a strong sense of belonging and safety. In contrast, a traditional classroom often maintains more formal interactions and generic physical spaces selected solely by the instructor. While structured, these environments may feel less personal and provide fewer opportunities for students to feel connected or reflected in the classroom setting. Now, we will watch a short video clip featuring culturally responsive classrooms. What are examples you see of cultural connections, contextualized learning, and inviting environments? What were some ways culturally responsive teaching was demonstrated in the video? Stop the video at this time to write down your reflections. Possible answers include: the instructor spoke on creating classrooms based on backgrounds and families so students could see themselves in the text and the examples. Relevant learning materials, welcoming space where students see themselves in the environment around them and creating a space to share multiple perspectives were examples of culturally responsive teaching in the video. The video was a great way to see some culturally responsive practices in the school and classroom. In this next section, we discuss ways you can work towards a culturally responsive classroom through your own actions. First, build relationships. Prioritize relationship building by intentionally learning about students' interests, preferences, families, and academic and personal goals. Establish trust through transparency, consistency, and authentic communication with students. Foster a collaborative classroom learning community grounded in mutual respect, belonging, and shared responsibility. Secondly, be aware of personal biases. In an educational setting, bias is often a very real issue. We see it regularly in classrooms in which a student perceives the instructor as being unfair or that grading practices are not consistent from one student to another. This perception may or may not be accurate, but being unaware of our biases may influence pedagogical decisions. Unconscious biases can also contribute to flawed thinking. Being cognizant of the fact that we all have biases will not change them, but it may help us make more informed decisions and value differences from various perspectives, so we are not perpetrating inequality. Next, make learning contextual by intentionally connecting curriculum content to students' social and community contexts to enhance relevance and meaning. Design lessons that explicitly link academic concepts to students' lived experiences and environments. Incorporate instructional activities that prompt students to examine real-world applications of learning and integrate authentic social and community-based examples into instruction to support deeper understanding and engagement. Finally, intentionally leverage students' cultural capital by designing learning experiences that allow them to draw upon and share their knowledge, skills, and strengths. Create structured opportunities for students to contribute their cultural experiences, stories, and perspectives as valued sources of learning. When appropriate, support the use of students' home languages and encourage the sharing of linguistic knowledge and vocabulary to enhance understanding. For our final reflection, how do these 4 personal practices align with the 4 R's of cultural responsive teaching: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility? Stop the video to reflect and jot down your answers. Possible answers. The practices align with the 4 R's in that knowing about our students by building relationships establishes trust and respect, free of personal bias. Making learning contextual ensures relevance to students' lives and opportunities for practicing social responsibility. Finally, tapping into students' cultural capital allows for reciprocity, where instructors are learning from the students as much as students are learning from the instructors. All of these create the culturally responsive environment needed to make the classroom inclusive and centered on student experiences. We have covered a lot of content, so let's review before we conclude. Participants explored the 4 components of culturally responsive pedagogy: affirmation, validation, cognition, and information processing. and examined how these elements support student engagement and deeper learning. This session provided an overview of culturally responsive teaching as an instructional approach grounded in the principles of respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. We also highlighted key differences between culturally responsive and traditional classrooms, focusing on cultural connections, contextualized learning, and inviting environments. Finally, 4 culturally responsive teaching goals are to build relationships, examine personal biases, make learning contextual, and leverage students' cultural capital. Together, these concepts reinforce the belief that honoring students' identities, experiences, and strengths leads to more equitable, meaningful, and effective teaching and learning experiences. We hope you enjoyed this module on culturally responsive teaching practices. Please complete the Check for Understanding (CFU) and the survey included in the Google Classroom. Thank you, and we look forward to providing continued support for your professional growth at University Instructors.